Hello everyone. Today I'll be going through the Year 12 Math Methods Worksheet 2. So I've got all my written solutions here. Now we'll go through them. So for the first question, notice that 2 times log EX is the same as log EX squared. And because we're minusing another log E term, we can just combine them together through dividing as shown here. And that is equal to log E3. Our next step is to get rid of the log. And I moved 2x minus 3 to the right-hand side here. And the rest should be quite simple. It's just a quadratic. We factorize it and we get x is equal to 3 as our answer. The next question, I'm going to just draw a line here to divide that. So we'll let u be e of x. And then we can, so this equation just can be written as this. And then again, it's another quadratic. If we factorize it, we'll get two solutions. But we know that u is equal to e to the power of x. So u cannot be a negative number. So negative 2 is an invalid solution. So u must be a half. A half is equal to e of x. X must be log e a half. The next question, to find f inverse of x, we first swap x and y, so we get something like that. We rearrange, and then we will get f inverse of x is equal to 2 over x plus 4. The range of f inverse of x is just a domain of our f of x, which is stated right here, real numbers excluding 0. Sorry, positive real numbers excluding 0. And the domain we can kind of get by looking at this graph here. We see that this negative 4 here is an asymptote. So in other words, our lowest value is approaching to negative 4. And our positive, and then the highest value we can get is basically just infinity. Because the smaller the x value, the bigger 2 over x is. And in other words, our domain for f inverse of x is just from negative 4 to infinity, non-inclusive. And to sketch this graph, now we sketch f inverse of x. First of all, we know that there is an asymptote at negative x is equal to negative 4, which I labeled right here, this dotted line here. The rest is basically just we reflect this graph in the line y is equal to x, and we get something that looks like that. And the y-intercept, we just let x equal to 0, so 2 over 4 is a half. All right, now to the multiple choice questions. The first question, we know that because there's a square root, everything in here must be greater or equal to 0. So in other words, 9 minus 3x must be greater or equal to 0. So 9 it must be greater or equal to 3x. 3 must be greater or equal to x. And that gives us the option D. For question 5, what we can do is we take the coefficients of each term and we do the first times the fourth minus the second times the third. So in other words, if you write them in matrices form, it's just the determinant formula, so AD minus BC, and we get a quadratic here. We factorize it to get m equals to -8 or -2. So we know that these two solutions correspond to, one of them corresponds to infinite solution, one of them corresponds to no solution. We just have to sub them in to see which one gives infinite, which one gives no solution, and we end up with A, which is -2. And in other words, -8 here will give us no solutions. Question 6, a transformation question. We know that x is equal to 3x dash minus 2, stated here. Y is equal to -y dash plus 1. We solve for x dash and y dash, and we get these two equations. We plug them into our y is equal to cube root of x formula. We get this, and then rearrange, and we'll get E as our final answer. Question 7, we're looking for 1 minus f of 2x here. So this 2x here is a dilation factor from the y-axis. In other words, we're halving, how wide our graph is. So it can't be A, it can't be C because we're not halving the graph for C. And then we can now look at the negative sign. This negative sign is reflection in the y-axis. So in other words, a graph must be reflected. So it can't be B, it can't be D. So we're left with E. And we can confirm as well, right? Because this part here is 3, which reflected becomes, and when we reflect it and we add 1, and then we'll get around -2, right? Because -3 plus 1 is -2. So E must be our correct answer here. This one might be a little tricky, question 8, but once we understand how it works, it's actually not that bad. So we're looking for f of g of x. So we know that this is a composite function. In other words, the range of f becomes the domain of g. So what is the range of f? We see here it's from -2, and let's assume it ends here. which is to 5. But in reality, it can extend on extend more, but this should be enough for us to get the answer. So we know that the range of f of x is from -2 to 5, and that becomes our domain for g of x. So let's look at g of x from -2 to 5. Notice I've drawn a point here. This is -2, and 5 here is actually off the screen, but essentially this is the graph that corresponds to the output. And notice that f of x here is the absolute value function. In other words, the positive and negative value of x maps to the same y value. So in other words, the positive and the negative value of f of g of x must look the same, basically. In other words, it's just a mirror of each other. And we know that one side must look like that, so the other side must look the same, so the answer must be B, basically. Question 9, this one, the most common incorrect answer for this will be D. So the x minus b cubed part should be pretty simple here because we see there's a stationary point of inflection here. So it must be x minus b cubed. That must be one of the factors. But we know that a is a negative number. So if x plus a, we'll actually get x minus something. So in other words, actually, the correct answer here is actually C, because x minus a negative number will give us a x plus something, basically, because 2 negative makes a positive. So yeah, if you got D, it's just made I guess a little mistake here. Just make sure we have to understand like the positive and negative nature of a number. And yeah, so the correct answer here is C. Question 10, we know that x plus 1 is a factor. So in other words, f of -1 must be 0. So we sub that in equal to 0. A is -1. And because, in other words, we just have x cubed plus 3x squared plus 3x plus 1. And we know that that is equal to x plus 1 cubed. In other words, there's no other factors. So E is the correct answer here. The final question, 11. We know that 2 log ex is just log e x squared. So f of x must be equal to g of x. But we know that for this, x can only go from 0 to infinity, non-inclusive. But for x squared, we can go from -infinity to positive infinity, not including 0. In other words, their domain's different. That's why we pick up B. Yeah, and that's everything for the worksheet. And here's all the answers. If there's any other questions, please let me know. Other than that, I will see you all next week.